Hello. All right, let's get started on our paper airplane lab. So this is our lab for our scientific method. And so as we're working through this, we're really going to focus on the scientific method side of things. We're not going to really worry as much about some of the measurements, as I'm sure most of you do not have meter sticks at home. And to ask you to measure the distance that a paper airplane flies by rolling a ruler end over end over end is a little bit excessive. So I'll explain what I'm expecting you folks to get done for this lab. If you can modify the lab on Kami through Schoology, great. If you want to modify it with some other program, that's fine too. Save a copy. You'll have the same upload option that everyone else does. If that's not going to work, by all means, you can write your answers on a separate sheet of paper, take a picture of that, make sure it's close enough and clear enough that I can read what you are writing. And you can send that in. You can type it on a separate document. All of that will work just fine. So let me show you guys our actual lab. All right, so here is the paper airplane lab. The basic idea here is what we want to do is we want to take the scientific method, our 5 steps, and we want to apply that to trying to build the best paper airplane that we can. So the pre-lab part, and this is really where the focus of this lab is going to be. So first, number 1, make a list of modifications that we could make to a regular paper airplane. Now, we want at least 5 of them. So, in general, there's a lot of different options you can come up with. But you're going to want to focus on things that modify the paper airplane entirely. So the example they give here is weight. You could add weight to it to make it heavier. You could try to remove weight from it in order to make it lighter. So weight is one of those 5 things that we might be able to change about the paper airplane. There are some other options. Maybe you want to change the size of the wings. You can fold the paper airplane to make it with less wing and more body, or with less body and more wing. You could fold the edges of the wings either up or down in order to make flaps that might influence it. So there's 3 things to help you out. You should be able to come up with 2 more possible changes that you could make to the paper airplane that might change its flight characteristics. Now, as a group, and groups can be 1 to 3 people, and I will explain why in a moment. You're going to pick only one of your modifications from number 1 to test. Now note, this one says, which one are you choosing? Question mark. Make sure you answer that in this blank. Then describe how you will make modifications for this variable. For example, if you choose weight, how will you add or subtract weight? Question mark. So there, answer that in this blank too. Then they tell you this variable is called your independent variable. It is the one thing you change in this experiment. Pick an independent variable that you can increase and decrease. So you can answer 2 things here. What are you choosing, and how are you going to make those choices or those changes? Number 3, the purpose of running trials is to determine how far the plane is able to fly. This distance is what you will measure. In an experiment, what you are measuring is called the dependent variable, because the distance it flies depends on the independent variable that you are changing. Because you won't get the same distance every time, you're going to need to run a series of trials. You should do your best to use the same technique every time. These are called constants. Constants are the ways that you keep the environment and the methods the same so they won't influence your results. So now, what are the constants you will use to keep these trials the same? You should find 3 constants and list them out. I'm going to give you 1, so you'll need to do 2 more on your own. The one I'm explaining to you is how hard you throw the plane. If you change how hard you're throwing it every single time, you are going to wildly change what your data will look like. So it's best to make sure and maintain the same method, the same force as best as you can for every single throw. And you want to communicate that with your group, because ideally you should have up to three different members of your group, each doing their own plane variation. So make sure that everyone's trying to do it the same way. Find two other things that you want to keep the same. Number 4, a hypothesis is a statement that describes a connection between your independent variable and your dependent variable. You've heard this, and we often use it as an if-then statement. So if I increase the weight of my plane, then it will fly further. You have to make sure it's specific for what you're going to change and what you expect to happen. You can't just say, if I change the weight, then it will fly differently. That's not a hypothesis. It must be, if I change the weight, or if I increase the weight, then it will fly further. Or if I increase the weight, then it will fly shorter. Or if I decrease the weight, then it will fly further. Or if I increase the weight, then it will fly further. You get the idea. It must be specific. Write it down for number 4. Number 5, if your hypothesis is correct, what do you predict will happen? Which trial? The control, experimental 1, or experimental 2? Those are going to be your 3 groups. I'll explain those in a moment. Which one will fly the furthest? Which will fly the shortest? Answer both of those questions for number 5. All right, so what are we actually going to do? You are going to pick a paper airplane style that everybody in your group can construct. You're going to build 3 different paper airplanes. They should be as identical as possible. Then one of them will stay the same. That is your control. That is your normal paper airplane. The other 2 should get modifications to increase, decrease, or change something, like we talked about in number 2. Then you're going to run 8 trials of throwing the paper airplanes and recording how far they go. Then we are going to calculate the mean for all of them. Now, this is going to be very easy. Ignore median, mode, and range down here. And the mean, even that mathematical approach, isn't going to work for us because we're going to use a more general form of measurement. Okay, so that's our pre-lab, our setup for what are we going to do, how are we going to do it, and then getting the planes set up for their trials. Then you're going to do your control plane, no modifications, 8 throws, experimental 1, 8 throws, experimental 2, 8 throws. Now for the distance, all we're going to record is basically none if it doesn't fly and it just immediately crashes to the ground. Short, if it's within about 20 feet of you. Medium, if it's like 20 to 40 feet away, which is a pretty good distance. And high, if it goes more than 40 feet. All right, that's all we're going to do. So none if it crashes, short if it's close to you, medium if it's more than 20 feet away, high if it's more than 40 feet away. And I understand you may look at something and go, I'm not really sure where it is. Use your best judgment. So you'll record all of those down here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at whichever one seems to appear the most common, and we're just going to record that as the mean. It's going to be the closest that we're going to get for right now. We're not going to worry about a numerical scale for it. Now, there are some post-lab questions, but we're going to talk about these as a group tomorrow. This should be enough to get you started. You want to talk about what could you change on a plane, pre-lab number 1. What will you change and how, number 2. What are you going to keep the same? I said to keep throwing power the same. You need to find 2 other constants that you're going to keep the same. State your hypothesis. If I do a change, say what your change will be. Then it will fly further or shorter, whatever you expect to happen. Number 5, which trial then do you think will fly the furthest, and which one will you fly? Do you think will fly the shortest? And then build your paper airplane, do your tests. That is our lab period for today. It's a lot of stuff, but that's why this is a 60-minute lab. This lab will count for 60 minutes towards your 1,200-minute requirement, and you can work in groups of up to 3. I will need each person of the group, though, to turn in their own lab. So make sure that everybody is getting their part done. All right, hopefully that helps to explain the lab. If anybody needs any additional help, please see me either during a class, message me on Schoology, or email me at emathrick@norwich.csd. Have a great day. I'll see you soon.